Hello, friends. Today we are going to see how Alexander the Great king of Macedon, one of the greatest military commanders in history, defeated the mightiest empire of his time, the ancient Persian Empire. So let's get started. After defeating the Persians in the Battle of Granicus River in 334 BC, Alexander continued his eastern campaign into Anatolia and soon reached the capital of Lydia, Sardis. There he received a message from the Persian king Darius III that if Alexander would return to Greece, then Darius would allow him to keep all the possessions that he had acquired so far. But this offer was just a trap laid by Darius to lure Alexander back to Greece and save his collapsing empire. For Darius knew that without the support of its Greek allies, Alexander's army would never dare to venture deep into the heartland of the Persian Empire. Alexander saw through the trick, though, and instead of taking the bait, he turned his attention towards the Phoenician city of Tyre. Tyre was an important naval base of the Persians and also an extremely wealthy city, but it was situated on an island separated from the mainland by a narrow channel which could only be crossed by a small isthmus. Alexander, with his characteristic show of brute force, built a road across the isthmus to bring his army and siege engines right up to the gates of the city. He then launched a sustained siege that lasted for 7 months. The citizens of Tyre fought desperately, but they were no match for the Macedonian phalanx, and after 7 months the city fell, and Tyre became part of Alexander's empire. Meanwhile, Darius was frantically trying to raise an army to stop Alexander's advance. He appointed 2 of his nobles, Memnon and Parmenion, as satraps or governors to raise troops and stop the invaders. They raised a huge army of 300,000 men and marched to meet Alexander at the river Bagratis. Now, the numbers that we find in ancient sources regarding armies are often exaggerated, and usually are not to be taken literally, since most ancient authors had a tendency to present their heroes as invincible, and their enemies in the most horrendous numbers so as to make them appear invincible. Hence, it's impossible to know the exact number of troops that each side had during this battle. But what we do know from various accounts is that the Persian army under Memnon and Parmenion was indeed one of the largest armies ever assembled until that time. Memnon was a veteran general who had served the Achaemenid kings for many years and had a lot of experience in warfare. He set up his camp near the river and sent out scouts to observe the enemy. He also selected a group of 10,000 elite soldiers, both horse and foot, and posted them around his camp to guard against any possible night attack by the enemy. On the other hand, Alexander, when he learned about the size of the Persian army, wrote a letter to his friend and companion, Ptolemy, in which he said, "Give me a strong post to stand upon that I may destroy the whole army." From this it is evident that Alexander, too, had a very high opinion of his own strength and prowess. He didn't bother much about the size of the Persian army, even though it was more than twice the size of his own. The next day, Alexander advanced to the river and set up his camp. At dawn, Memnon came out with his cavalry to challenge the enemy. His cavalry charged hard, hoping to break through the Macedonian lines and destroy their baggage train. But the Macedonian cavalry held firm. Then Alexander himself came out to meet the Persian king in single combat. In the meantime, the Persian infantry was approaching, so it's likely that Memnon wasn't the real king of Persia, but only his general, since historical sources say nothing about Darius ceding the throne to anyone else. Anyway, Alexander met the Persian cavalry with his elite companion cavalry in a duel. Both horse and foot were clad in bronze armor, and their shields covered their bodies like a barrel. The Macedonians rode swift Arabian horses, whereas the Persians rode heavier horses suited for endurance rather than speed. Alexander fought valiantly, killing the Persian cavalrymen in large numbers, but he couldn't break through the enemy ranks. Meanwhile, the Macedonian phalanx engaged the Persian infantry. The disciplined Macedonian spearmen pushed forward and thrust their long spears into the loosely packed Persian soldiers, hacking them down like bundles of hay. The phalanx easily broke through the enemy lines. The Persian infantry had no answer to the Macedonian discipline and organization, and they started to fall back. Then Alexander realized that it was now or never. So he ordered a full charge, breaking through the fleeing Persian infantry. He pursued them along with his cavalry as far as the river Bagrates. There, the Persian army pitched their camp, so it's clear that the terrain must have been open and without cover. Otherwise, Alexander would have annihilated the entire Persian army. The river here flowed between high banks, forming a ravine, and the enemy fled into this ravine, thus escaping Alexander's further pursuit. Alexander then returned to his camp, having won a brilliant victory. But the following morning, another massive Persian army appeared on the horizon. This time it was led by the royal satrap Parmenion himself. Alexander's army was exhausted from the previous day's battle and hardly had enough time to set up their camp properly. So, once again, Alexander challenged the enemy king to single combat. But this time his challenge was accepted. The two armies lined up, and the two kings faced each other. And then there began one of the most epic duels in history. We have several accounts of this battle from ancient historians, and in each version, Alexander comes out victorious over Parmenion. However, according to some historians, Parmenion actually killed Alexander, but the wound proved fatal to Parmenion himself, and he died shortly thereafter. But the majority of ancient sources say that it was Alexander who killed Parmenion. In any case, after the death of Parmenion, the remaining Persians fled away, leaving him and their dead king on the field. Thus, Alexander had defeated two massive Persian armies in 2 successive days, proving his supremacy over the mightiest empire of the known world. Now, after the battle, Alexander showed magnanimity towards the defeated Persians and allowed them to leave his camp with their lives and property. And this magnanimity helped him in keeping his Greek allies loyal to him because it sent a message among the Greeks that he wasn't interested in oppressing them or imposing heavy tribute on them. Like the Persians, he would treat them fairly. Next, Alexander advanced towards Susa, the winter capital of the Achaemenid Empire. On his way, he captured the cities of Susa and Persepolis, 2 of the largest and wealthiest cities of the Persians. He freed the Jews from the forced labor that the Persians had subjected them to, and they welcomed Alexander as a liberator. He also ordered the reconstruction of the city of Persepolis, which the Persians had destroyed before leaving it. Meanwhile, Darius, after hearing about the fall of Susa and Persepolis, fled to the east, hoping to raise another army to check the Macedonian advance. But while he was on the run, his own generals and advisors, seeing the collapse of the Persian war effort, revolted against him. They murdered Darius and made his son Artaxerxes the new king. Then they approached Alexander and submitted to him, giving him the submission of all Persia except the satrapies of the east. Thus, Alexander had conquered the greatest empire of the time, an empire that stretched from Central Europe to the Indus Valley. He had achieved what no other conqueror had ever achieved before. Only his friend and companion, Ptolemy, shared in his joy. The rest of his generals were thinking about how to divide the spoils. But soon Alexander fell ill and died at the age of 32. Whether it was due to malaria, typhoid, or some other disease, nobody knows. But one thing is for sure, the sudden demise of this great warrior deprived the world of a true legend. Friends, that's it for today. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Alexander the Great, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. See you next time.